Thank you for joining us for Coffee and Conversation, where we're excited to do a preview of Shirley Johnson, who will be joining us as one of our local artists from Onalaska here. She owns Joyful Blending and does fabulous work. And actually, one of her passions is painting flowers. And you'll see how she uses alcohol inks to accomplish beautiful work. So you'll want to see her in person live May 1st from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. So please do join us for that as well.
Thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to it, both today and Saturday.
What are alcohol inks and how are they different from watercolor, acrylic, or oil paints?
Watercolor paints are pigments suspended in water. Oil paints are pigments suspended in linseed oil. Acrylic paints are pigments suspended in acrylic polymers. So, as the name suggests, alcohol inks are dyes suspended in alcohol, actually like isopropyl alcohol, the kind of home alcohol that you would use in your home for sanitation.
Sure. So then, how is creating with alcohol inks different, from creating with watercolors or acrylics or oils?
Well, as I mentioned, the alcohol inks are considered a fluid art, and they're formulated to create vivid pops of color, and they're transparent so you can layer and create levels of depth. They're also very fast drying because, as you know, when you put on a hand sanitizer, that alcohol evaporates very quickly. And that's what's happening when you use the alcohol inks. The alcohol is evaporating and you're left with the dry dyes. So unlike watercolors and oils that dry slowly and the pigments go pretty much where you put them, with alcohol ink, you put down the ink, and then if you surround it with more alcohol, the alcohol pushes in the color. So the color shrinks. And so you have this process of continually pushing and pulling. The inks have sort of a mind of their own. And so the results, depending on how the artist manipulates that alcohol and those dyes, the results are very free-flowing, organic shapes. The other main difference with alcohol inks is that once your piece is dry, the alcohol is evaporated, you have these dyes now on your piece of paper. If you don't like it, you can revive those dyes by just applying more alcohol. So the process is sort of step by step. You make a piece, and if you don't like it, you can change it, or if you don't like it at all, you can take a cotton pad with alcohol and just swipe it away and start over with a clean slate. So it's very refreshing in that way, in that, if you're not a trained artist or if you're a beginner artist, you can have a lot of fun with just experimenting with the inks and seeing what you come up with, and then starting over if you don't like what you've created. Nothing lost.
Very cool. So how do you apply the ink, and what tools do you use?
Well, there are three main methods, I would say, to apply the inks. One is to just pour the ink straight out of the bottle. The bottles are about, maybe an ounce or less. And so you can just apply that directly to your substrate, or you could put a little ink on a cotton ball or a cotton round and rub it on your substrate to create like a background, or you could apply it with a brush. But I think what's most interesting is that most alcohol ink artists use some very unconventional tools to what we call tame the ink. And so one method is to blow the ink. And for blowing the ink, I might use a straw. I sometimes use a hair dryer. I've used canned air. I also have an airbrush that I like. And each one of those blowing methods produces a totally different kind of look. You can also use gravity to just tilt your paper and let the ink flow, and that gives you a very sort of landscapey, flowing look to your piece. You can use a straight edge. Sometimes I use like a plastic credit card, anything to move that ink and create like a straight edge if that's what I'm going for. Q-tips are another unconventional sort of tool that you can use to dot the ink, and as the alcohol evaporates, you're left with a lot of texture. Sometimes I use a paintbrush, but I also use what's called a felt stamp. And so here is where I'm going to be using a stamp to show you how the ink actually, when I stamp it on a tile, the ink actually blooms. It's called blooming the ink. And it's very cool to watch, and when the ink dries, I'll apply another color, and you can see how the colors blend and interact with each other. So it's a very experimental process.
Neat. So what surfaces do you prefer to work on?
I'm glad you asked. Because this is such a fluid medium, it works best on non-porous surfaces, so the dyes suspended in the alcohol can stay fluid and not soak in. So for example, you would not want to use watercolor paper because at least to get good results, because the ink would just absorb immediately into the paper. So the best surfaces for alcohol ink art is to use non-porous, like ceramic tiles or porcelain. I've even know of some artists who use Corian tiles. U-bowl paper, which is a specialized paper made specifically for fluid art, and it's a plasticized paper, so the alcohol and the ink sit on top of the paper. There are certain photographic papers that have that same plasticized quality, so you can use photo paper sometime. Whiteboard. I've even painted on wax paper, because again, the wax paper is just enough of a has enough of a surface that the alcohol doesn't absorb, but the inks actually move. I can also use canvas that has been prepped with a special varnish, again, to keep the canvas waterproof.
And why did you choose this medium?
Well, I was attracted to alcohol inks because you don't have to be a trained artist to create beautiful art. I have some art background, but I'm not a trained artist, and the best part of my day is when I just set aside some time and go experiment with my inks. There are lots of happy accidents that happen through the experimentation process, and that is what led me to name my business Joyful Blending, because there are so many joyful experiences working with the inks.
How do you start a piece?
Well, I usually start off just determining the basics. Am I going to want a horizontal piece or vertical? I select some colors. I try to keep them to a minimum, and because sometimes you can get colors and they start mixing and they make mud. So you want to, especially I like to have a real clear color saturation and not muddy them. And then that's where I start to surrender to those happy accidents that I mentioned earlier. I might start out with the idea of creating a flower, but it might turn into a landscape. So you just never know.
Just kind of flow with it.
Yes, go with the flow. That's what we say.
So how do you finish a piece?
Well, interestingly, most paints will be affected somewhat by sunlight, but alcohol inks are specifically not very light fast. That means they'll fade. So I always finish every piece with 3 coats of a product called Kmar. It's a non-alcohol based protection, because if I sprayed an alcohol based, it would just reactivate all the inks. So it's 3 coats of Kmar and then 3 coats of a UV protection.
Perfect. So you'll be here live at the Treehouse on Saturday, May 1st from 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. And what will you be demonstrating?
Well, I plan to create some additional pieces in my series called mini bouquets. They're 4x4 tiles that will be painted, finished, and framed for gift giving. And they're great for setting on a bookcase or on your nightstand. They can hang singly, in pairs, or grouped. And I'm going to be showing some very basic techniques so people can actually see a piece started and finished. I look forward to it.
Well, great. We are excited to have you. So come visit us and see Shirley's artwork in person.